The colony was dying, and it didn't even die quietly. It screamed in molten metal and shrieked in collapsing towers. The kind of death that clawed its way into the lungs and left a taste of ash no water would ever wash away. Streets once carved, with precision now melted into rivers of slag, their edges curling like paper in a fire. Smoke roared overhead, blotting out the sky until the sun was nothing but a dim bruise behind a curtain of gray. Evacuation sirens wailed in the distance, thin and desperate, swallowed by the chaos. Above, the last ships tore through the atmosphere, engines blazing streaks of blue against the orange haze. They rose higher and higher, pulling the lucky few toward safety, leaving behind only silence and flame. Those ships weren't coming back. They never did. Through the choking smog, one figure ran the wrong way. While the tide of panicked colonists surged for the shuttles, he cut against them, boots hammering cracked pavement, lungs drawing in poison with every ragged breath. Ethanville had never been good at doing what was expected. Reckless, they'd called him once. Loyal to the wrong things, someone else had said. Maybe they were both right. His jacket was singed along the edges, heat biting at his skin as if to remind him that this was suicide. He didn't care. Not after the last time. Not after that promise whispered to a fading face years ago. Never again, he'd said. Never leave someone behind. The memory clung like smoke, sharp and relentless, pushing him harder as the firestorm roared louder in his ears. The colony was a grave now. But even graves had ghost sand. Ethan was running toward one. The ground trembled beneath him as another. Buildings surrendered to the flames, metal screaming as it tore apart. Shards of glass rained down, glittering like falling stars before shattering into nothing on the pavement. His boots skidded on molten streaks, throwing sparks as he swung around a corner, his pulse thundering like a war drum in his throat. Then, he saw it at first. He thought it was a trick of the firelight or flash of silver swallowed by smoke, but it pulsed faintly, defiantly, through the haze. Not light from the flames. Something else. Something alive. Ethan slowed, heart slamming against his ribs as he squinted through the swirling ash. It was coming from a half-collapsed structure ahead, its frame buckling under the relentless assault of fire. Steel beams bent like brittle twigs, their molten edges glowing orange as the ceiling groaned, threatening to come down at any second. Great, he muttered, voice rough against the acrid air. Of course, it's in there. His instincts screamed at him to turn back, to run before the building crushed everything inside, it including him. But instincts had never won against Ethan's stubborn streak. He clenched his jaw, cursed under his breath, and bolted forward. The heat slammed into him like a living wall as he crossed the threshold. The temperature inside was brutal, a suffocating inferno that clawed at every inch of exposed skin. Metal walls shimmered and warped, groaning under the strain. Sparks hissed from ruptured conduits, dancing across the cracked floor. Every breath tasted like ash and burning wire. Fantastic plan. Vil, he rasped, ducking under a sagging beam that spit embers when it shifted. Run into the oven. Real smart. The silver glow flickered again through the smoke, faint but steady. He moved toward it, boots crunching over debris, every nerve in his body thrumming with urgency. The sound of tearing metal overhead was constant now, like some enormous beast ripping the building apart with its teeth. Time was running out. He shoved aside a sheet of scorched plating and froze. On the floor, curled against what remained of a wall, was a figure. For half a second, his mind refused to process it, because nothing about her looked possible. Her skin gleamed like brushed steel, kissed by moonlight, smooth even beneath streaks of soot. Fabric clung to her body in torn fragments, silver and translucent, shifting like liquid when the firelight touched it. But it wasn't her skin or her strange clothes that stole the air. From his lungs it was her stillness. She lay there as if the flames didn't matter, limbs drawn in, Her face turned slightly to the side. For one terrifying moment, he thought he was too late. Then her chest rose, shallow but steady, alive, barely. Ethan's throat tightened. Whatever she wasn't built for this hell. Neither was he, for that matter, but she had minutes, maybe seconds, before this place became her tomb. Well, he breathed, voice hoarse. Guess I found my ghost. A deafening crack split the air. The ceiling above them sagged, showers of sparks cascading like a fiery waterfall. Instinct shoved panic down hard as Ethan lunged forward, dropping to his knees beside her. The heat was worse here, biting into his skin like teeth, but he barely felt it. His hands hovered for a split second, unsure where to touch, before settling on her shoulders. Hey, he coughed, giving her a gentle shake. Now's not the time to nap. Trust me, the accommodations suck. No response, just the faint flutter of her lashes. Another groan ripped through the structure. A beam gave way with a metallic scream, slamming down inches from where he knelt. Okay, no time for polite introductions. His voice was tight now, breath burning in his chest as he slid an arm beneath her knees, another around her back. She was impossibly light, as if gravity didn't quite apply to her. He didn't stop to wonder why. The building roared its fury as Ethan rose with her in his arms, muscles straining against the weight of smoke and exhaustion. Somewhere above, metal screamed Agnan this time. It sounded final. He ran. The world narrowed to fire and shadows, his boots pounding over fractured ground, the silver glow of her body burning against the darkness like a promise he hadn't known he needed to keep. Behind him, the ceiling began to fall. The colony was still burning, but outside the collapsing structure, the night felt almost too still compared to the chaos inside. Ethan staggered to a halt, knees nearly giving out, as he laid the alien girl gently on a strip of cracked pavement. His breath came in ragged gasps, each inhale burning like he'd swallowed fire. The sky above was a canvas of smoke and orange light, but here, close to the ground, the world seemed muffled, like the flames were holding their breath. She lay motionless for a moment, silver-toned skin streaked with soot and ash, hair tangled across her face like strands of liquid metal. He crouched beside her, scanning for movement, for any sign that the insane gamble he'd just made wasn't in vain. Come on, he murmured, voice rough. You didn't make me dive through hell just to quit now. Then she stirred. It was faint at first, a twitch of fingers, a soft intake of breath, but it was enough to make him exhale hard, relief flooding through him. Her eyes opened, and for the second time, Ethan found himself staring into something that made the burning world around them seem dull. They weren't eyes so much as windows, violet and indigo, swirling like galaxies, flecked with tiny points of light that seemed to pulse faintly. They didn't just look at him, they looked through him, like they could see the sum of every choice he'd ever made. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she blinked slowly, and her lips moved, dry and cracked, but forming words that came out soft, melodic even through the smoke. Why did you stay? Ethan let out a hoarse laugh that was more nerves than humor. Call me sentimental, or stupid. Pick your favorite. He glanced back at the building behind them, now collapsing in on itself like a dying star. But I wasn't going to leave anyone in there. Not again. Her brow furrowed at that last word, but before she could ask, the ground shuddered. Ethan's head snapped up, instincts sharpening. Somewhere beyond the fire's crackle, a new sound began to rise, a hum, low and mechanical, almost like a swarm of insects magnified through steel. It came from the ruins, from the thickening smoke, and it was moving closer. He swore under his breath. Of course. Can't even get 5 minutes to breathe. He looked down at her. We need to move. Can you stand? Her gaze flicked toward the smoke, something cold flashing across her features. She shook her head slightly, and though her voice was barely above a whisper, it carried an edge of warning. Not human. They're here. Ethan didn't know what she meant, but the tone was enough to set his teeth on edge. He hooked his arms under her again, lifting her gently but firmly. She was so light it was unsettling, like carrying a shadow. He started running. The colony's main street was a corridor of broken light and broken dreams, burnt-out signs flickering, shattered storefronts, yawning black, fires crawling over steel. He moved fast, but the sound followed. That steady mechanical hum threading through the night, weaving around the roar of the flames. Want to explain what's chasing us? Ethan grunted, dodging debris. Her head rested against his shoulder, breath uneven. Hunters, she said finally. They will not stop. That word, the certainty in it, made his stomach knot. Hunters of what? Of me, she murmured. There were 1,000 questions to ask, but none of them mattered more than the sound growing louder behind them. It wasn't just one source now. It was many, moving like a pack, swift and deliberate. They turned a corner, and Ethan skidded to a stop. Ahead, the main avenue stretched out like a corridor of ruin, but a building halfway down gave him cover. He ducked into it, boots crunching over shattered glass, and eased her down against a wall. The glow from the fires outside painted the space in violent oranges and shadows. "Stay here," he said, but she caught his sleeve weakly, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so fragile. "They see differently," she whispered, "not just sight, sound, movement. You cannot hide." "Great," Ethan muttered, scanning the shadows. His heart was pounding, but his voice carried that same sardonic edge. "So they're basically nightmare bloodhounds. Fantastic." The hum was closer now, reverberating through the metal bones of the building. He crouched low, every sense straining, adrenaline sharpening the world into pieces, the crackle of fires, the drip of water from a ruptured pipe, the rhythm of something alien drawing near. Then, like a thread pulled tight, the hum stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Ethan's breath slowed. He could feel her gaze on him, those strange galaxy eyes watching, waiting. Something unspoken hung between them, not fear exactly, but something that felt like the edge of a cliff. It shared understanding that whatever came next could change everything. Then, from the smoke at the far end of the street, movement. Shadows stretched unnaturally, shapes sliding like liquid, gleaming edges catching firelight. They weren't human. They weren't even close. The girl shifted slightly against the wall, her expression tightening. "If they find us," she said, "you must run." Ethan gave her a look that was almost amused. "Even here, even now." "Yeah," he said quietly, "not really my style." Outside, the hunters moved, and the night seemed to hold its breath. The street outside was no longer silent. It was alive with motion, subtle and chilling. Ethan crouched low beside the alien girl, his back against the scorched wall, eyes narrowing, as shadows moved like predators in the glow of the burning colony. Smoke curled through broken windows, and with it came the sound, a steady, almost curious hum that vibrated in his bones. It wasn't loud, but it carried weight, the sound of machines built to hunt. Suri's breathing was shallow, but her gaze was steady, those eyes violet, deep, and somehow older than the fire around them, never left the shifting darkness. "They know," she murmured, voice quiet but sure. "They know I am here." Ethan's jaw tightened. "And I'm guessing they're not here to bring flowers." "No," she said, the faintest trace of sorrow in her tone. "They are here to retrieve, to erase." Something about that word made his stomach knot. Erase. He glanced at her small, fragile in his arms, silver-streaked with a shand, then at the shadows outside, shapes flowing closer, smooth and relentless. He'd faced ship fires, reactor failures, even a close brush with pirates once, but this was different. This was quiet, calculated danger, and it was closing in. He pushed away from the wall and moved deeper into the building. It was a skeleton of twisted beams and broken panels, the remnants of what might have been an office or a shop. The smell of scorched plastic hung heavy in the air. He found an interior corridor and pressed Suri gently against the wall, crouching. So they were eye level? All right, here's the deal, he said, keeping his voice steady, but low. I can run, fight, hide, swear, creatively pick any two. But I need to know what I'm up against. What are those things? She watched him for a long beat, something unreadable passing over her expression. Then she said softly, they are? Not alive as you know, life. They are built, not born. They are given purpose, and they do not stop. Great, he muttered. Robotic nightmares. Love that. He leaned closer. Why, you? What makes you worth setting half a colony on fire? Suri's gaze dropped for the first time, as if the weight of the question pressed on her shoulders. Because of what I carry, she said finally. Because of what I am. Before he could press further, a metallic thud echoed down the corridor, sharp and final. The sound was deliberate, like a step taken for effect, and it was close. Ethan straightened immediately, instincts screaming, all right, talking time over. Stay behind me. I cannot fight, she said quietly. Didn't ask you to, he replied, and the calm in his tone surprised even him. The next moment stretched long. The hum swelled again, vibrating through the floor and walls. A shadow lengthened across the far end of the hall, sleek and smooth, not bound by human shape. It moved like liquid metal, given bones, each motion precise. Predatory. Ethan didn't think his mind shifted into something else, something sharper. The world seemed to stretch around him. He could hear the distant pop of fires, the hiss of cooling metal, the faint shift of weight as the thing advanced. His senses were dialed far beyond normal. It was too much and yet perfect, as if his brain was already rewriting itself to keep up. The creature came into view, tall, jointed like an insect but with armor plates of dark reflective material. It had no face, only a surface that mirrored the fire behind it. Limbs tapered into blades and claws that clicked softly against the floor. It paused, head or what passed for a head angling, as if it could taste their fear. Suri's hand tightened weakly on his sleeve. Ethan felt it, felt the tremor, but also something else, a pulse, a connection. The creature moved suddenly, a blur of black and orange, as it lunged. Time snapped thin. Ethan didn't think, just moved. He dropped low, pulling Suri with him. And the thing's bladed arms scythed the air, where their heads had been a heartbeat before. Sparks exploded, as metals sheared through the wall behind them. Ethan pushed off the floor, half lifting, half carrying her, as he bolted down the corridor. Another shape slid into view from the side, its limbs unfolding like knives. Two of them, perfect. Ethan snarled under his breath. He dodged left, his mind racing faster than his feet, calculating angles, without knowing how. The corridor bent, debris scattered, and somehow he knew where each piece would be before he reached it. His boots avoided shattered glass, like he had practiced it 1,000 times. What's happening to me? He muttered, as they ran. Suri's voice was faint but certain. I touched you. Your mind sees more now. You are aligned with what hunts us. Ethan didn't have time to curse. Behind them, the hunters moved, fast, their hum rising to a pitch that was almost a song. They were faster than he could run, but he wasn't just running. Something inside him was guiding each step, turning panic into precision. They burst through a side door into open air, the night hitting them like a wall of cold smoke. Fires lit the horizon, buildings collapsing in waves of sparks. And now, behind them, the hunters spilled from the building, their shapes shifting, their limbs elongating as they adapted to the open space. Ethan tightened his grip on Suri and sprinted toward the skeletal remains of a transit platform. The steel beams were warped, but it offered some cover, some height. Each footfall sent vibrations through his body that he could almost read. They will not stop, Suri whispered against his shoulder. Yeah, he panted. I got that memo. Then, without warning, one of the hunters leaped, soaring in a perfect arc, its blades cutting the air like silent lightning. Ethan's body moved before his brain caught up. He dropped to a knee, twisted, and swung his arm up in a motion that made no sense till the hunter's momentum carried it past them, its claws biting only steel. He stared at his own hands, chest heaving. Oh, this is going to get weird, isn't it? Suri's answer was quiet but steady. It has only begun. And behind them, the rest of the hunters closed in. The colony burned like a dying star behind them. But there was no time to look back. Ethan's legs moved before his mind caught up, carrying both himself and the alien girl across what remained of the transit platform. The steel beams jutted like broken bones, warped by heat. The ground cracked and glowing in places where fire had bitten through 2 buried power conduits. Every step felt like running on the edge of a knife. Suri clung lightly to him, her weight almost nothing, but her presence heavy with something else: urgency, secrets, a calmness that didn't belong in a night like this. Her violet eyes stayed open, scanning the ruins even as her strength faltered. They are learning, she murmured. The words, a soft thread against the roar of distant flames. Ethan didn't like the sound of that. Learning, he asked, breath rough, eyes darting to the shadows that moved like liquid behind them. They were built to adapt. The more you evade them, the better they will become. Perfect. Love being the training exercise for murder. Machines, Ethan muttered. His tone stayed dry, but there was an edge now, a new awareness in the way he moved. He could feel them, not just see or hear them, but sense them like a shifting pressure in the air. Every hum of their strange bodies vibrated against his ribs, warning him a second before a shadow passed too close. Then the hum grew louder, and something slammed onto the platform behind them. Ethan spun, instinct snapping tight, and caught sight of a hunter crouched low, limbs spread like a predator. Its surface reflected the world around it in shards of broken light, blades flexing as if eager to taste metal and flesh. He didn't wait. He turned and ran, and the girl in his arms lifted her head slightly, murmuring left. He obeyed without hesitation, pivoting into a side corridor of steel and glass. A hunter's bladed arm swept through where his back had been a second earlier, tearing sparks from the ground. Not to sound ungrateful, Ethan said as he dodged debris, but you want to tell me why I'm suddenly playing tag with something out of a bad dream? They were built to contain me, Suri replied, her voice tight now, like steel under strain. I escaped. They burn what they cannot control. The pieces clicked together just enough to make him swear under his breath. So, I'm carrying the galaxy's most wanted fugitive. Her gaze stayed steady on his face, even now. You chose to carry me, she said simply. He almost stumbled at the weight of that truth, but the world gave him no time to respond. The corridor ended abruptly, opening to a wide plaza lit only by the glow of the fires and the cold shimmer of stars. And there they were, 3 hunters, standing like sentinels across the plaza, each one taller than a man, their limbs unfolding with quiet menace. Behind them, more movement in the smoke, smaller shapes darting like scouts. They weren't rushing now. They were waiting. Ethan stopped, boots skidding on cracked stone. He set Suri gently on her feet, his body between her and the machines. All right, he said, breath steady, but pulse hammering. You seem to know more than I do. How do we survive this? They will expect you to react, she said softly, but not to change the field. Change the what now? She reached out, her hand light on his wrist. The contact was brief, but the world shifted like glass, bending. Suddenly, Ethan saw everything differently. The plaza wasn't just broken stone and smoke. It was a web of lines and forces, the hunters glowing against the darkness. Their mass outlined, their velocity predicted by arcs of light. Even the wind seemed mapped, moving like currents around obstacles. Do not think of them as untouchable, Sori said, her voice calm even as the hunters began to move. You can bend what is around you. The gift I gave you, use it. Ethan stared at the shifting patterns only he could see. He almost laughed, sharp and humorless. I can barely breathe, and now you want me to rewrite physics. You already are, she said. You just haven't noticed. The hunters lunged. As one, Ethan moved, and for the first time, it wasn't just instinct. He cut left, feet gliding on fractured stone, his body following invisible lines. His hands came up, not to strike, but to redirect, and the first hunter stumbled. It wasn't much, just a hitch in its fluid motion, but enough to make its second strike hit nothing but air. The second hunter came fast, blade raised, and Ethan ducked low, sliding on his side across the ground. He felt the air ripple as the weapon passed inches above him. A spark of exhilaration lit through the fear. Keep moving, Sori called, her voice firm now, steady. The third hunter circled, learning. Ethan's vision traced its path, saw the faint tremor of weight shifting before it lunged. He didn't think he shifted the way he stepped, a subtle change, and the creature's trajectory went wide, its blade carving a support column instead of him. Okay, he muttered under his breath, heart pounding. That's new. But they weren't stopping. They were adapting, their movements sharper, their timing tighter. Each second stretched thin as they studied him, like prey that refused to die. They will keep adjusting, Sori warned, stepping closer, her hand lightly brushing his arm. But you can do more than react. Great, he snapped, even as his focus sharpened. Any chance this new trick comes with an instruction manual? No, she said simply. But you trust yourself. That is enough. The hunters came. Again, faster than before, but Ethan's mind was alive with light and motion. Every shift in the ground, every tremor in the air, told him something. And when the first hunter struck, Ethan was already gone, moving like the battlefield belonged to him. For the first time that night, he wasn't just running. He was fighting back, and the hunters seemed to realize it. The hunters retreated, but only far enough to watch. 3 of them stood at the edge of the burning plaza, their reflective forms catching the light of the flames like shards of black glass. They were learning, recalibrating, and Ethan could feel it. It wasn't something he heard, or it was, in the weight of the air, in the subtle shift of their stance. He leaned against a cracked column, breath heaving, and tried to process what had just happened. His hands still tingled, like static, charged with too much current. The world hadn't gone back to normal. It was sharper, layered, alive with hidden threads. Each shift of wind, each groan of cooling metal was mapped in his mind. Beside him, Sori was quiet, her silver-toned skin dimmed by soot and exhaustion. She was watching him, but not with fear, more like curiosity, as if she was measuring him against some unknown scale. You should not be able to do this so quickly, she said softly. Ethan shot her a look, half a grin, half a grimace. Guess I'm a fast learner. Or maybe I'm just too stupid to know when I should be dead. She tilted her head, the faintest shadow of a smile ghosting her lips. Not stupid, aligned. The word carried a weight he didn't understand. But before he could ask, she staggered slightly. Ethan caught her elbow, steadying her. She was light, but her weakness was obvious now. Whatever strength she had was fading. You're running on fumes, he said. We need to get you somewhere safe. There is no safe, she replied, voice calm but thin. Not while they hunt. Well, I'm still breathing, so that's a start, he muttered. He adjusted his grip and moved deeper into the ruins. The plaza opened into a transit tunnel half collapsed, the walls scorched and littered with debris. It smelled of smoke and old oil, but it was sheltered, quiet. They found a corner where the light didn't quite reach. Ethan eased her down against the wall, crouching in front of her. The fires painted their faces in flickers of orange, shadows deepening the exhaustion in her eyes. For the first time, the pace slowed. "You're going to tell me now?" Ethan said. His tone wasn't harsh, but it carried something heavier than before. "What are they? What are you?" Sori looked at him for a long moment. Her gaze was steady, calm in a way that made the chaos outside feel smaller. "I was not meant to be here," she said. "My kind does not wander freely. We are bound, controlled, until I chose to leave. Bound. They wanted what I carry. I was created for it, but I am not theirs anymore." She shifted, wincing slightly. "They are not just hunters. They are jailers. What you saw tonight, they burn whole worlds to keep something they believe belongs to them. And what's that?" Her fingers curled slightly against the broken floor. "Knowledge," she said simply. "A piece of something they fear." Her gaze flicked to him. "I gave you a fragment." Ethan sat back, exhaling hard. "So, let me get this straight. You're a runaway science experiment, carrying forbidden secrets, and you decided to dump some of that into my head without asking." "You saved me," she said, her voice almost gentle. "I could not let you face them with only human sight." Something about the way she said human sight made his chest tighten. "Well," he said, "next time, maybe ask before you rewire my brain." She lowered her eyes. "There may not be a next time." The silence stretched. Something shifted between them then, not just danger or necessity, but something quieter, warmer. Ethan realized he was still holding her arm, his thumb brushing over the faint shimmer of her skin. She looked up, and the firelight caught in her eyes, turning them into twin galaxies, reflecting something almost human. Gratitude, curiosity, maybe even trust. For a moment, the world outside the hunters, the fires, the smoke. There was only the sharpness of his breathing, the way her gaze held his, and the strange certainty that somehow he had stepped into something far bigger than himself. Then the sound returned, a low, vibrating hum, distant but closing. It threaded through the walls, echoing down the tunnels. Ethan stiffened, senses flaring. He could feel the vibrations like a pulse under his skin. "They've regrouped," Suri said quietly. "How many?" She hesitated, then said, "Too many." Ethan stood, every nerve awake. "Then we don't stay here." He offered her his hand. She looked at it for a moment, then placed her own in his. It was cool and light, almost fragile, but her grip was sure. As he pulled her to her feet, she stepped closer than before, close enough for him to feel the faint shimmer of her presence. "Ethan," she said softly, "they are coming faster now, because they know you touched what they fear." "Great," he said, forcing a grin. "I've always wanted to be on someone's most wanted list." "You do not understand," she said. "When they find us next, they will not come to chase. They will come to erase." The word hung between them, heavy and final. Ethan's jaw set. "Then let's make them regret it." Above them, something metallic screamed as it tore through the outer shell of the colony. The tunnel shook, dust cascading like rain. The hunters were coming, and the ground itself seemed to tense for what was next. The tunnel was no longer safe. Dust rained from the cracked ceiling, and somewhere above them, the sound of tearing steel echoed like an angry god ripping open the world. The hum of the hunters was louder now, layered and resonant, like a swarm of blades hidden in the dark. Ethan tightened his grip on Suri's hand and pulled her forward, boots crunching over shattered glass and debris. Every step sent echoes down the corridor, and he hated how exposed they were to figures running through a steel throat that could close at any second. "Where are we going?" he asked between breaths. "There is an old substation ahead," Suri replied, her voice calm despite the tremor in the floor. "It is shielded. For a while. For a while." Ethan shot her a sharp look. "You keep using phrases that do nothing for my stress levels." Suri's lips twitched, not quite a smile but close. "Stress sharpens you. I can see it." They moved fast, but Ethan's brain was faster. It wasn't just adrenaline now, it was something deeper, almost alien. Threads of movement and weight lit up in his mind, warning him before a pipe burst overhead or a panel gave way underfoot. His muscles moved with the certainty of someone who knew the shape of the next second. It was exhilarating and terrifying, like riding the edge of a blade. The tunnel bent left, then opened into a larger chamber, the substation Suri had promised. It was a skeleton of forgotten tech, massive transformers half collapsed, thick cables hanging like dead vines, and a control platform tilted at an angle. The smell of ozone was sharp, cutting through the smoke that drifted even here. Ethan stopped long enough to let Suri sink down against a wall. Her breathing was controlled, but there was a tension in her body, like someone conserving the last of something precious. "We won't be safe long," she said, scanning the room with those endless violet eyes. "They will find the resonance. They always do." Ethan crouched in front of her. "Then talk to me. Tell me what I'm carrying around in my skull, before it kills me, or gets us both shredded." She studied him for a moment, and there was a weight in her gaze that made the room feel smaller. "It is not something you carry, it is something you have become. I gave you alignment, a connection to the threads of perception that most minds cannot see. You are now tethered to what they hunt." "Tethered," Ethan said, grimacing. "That's a real comforting choice of words. You needed to see to survive," she said simply. "And you have done more than that. You moved with it. You bent the field around you. That is not usual, not for your kind." Her words carried an edge of surprise, maybe even respect. But before Ethan could press further, the hum rose again. This time it was everywhere. The walls seemed to vibrate with it, a low mechanical growl that crawled under the skin. Suri's head lifted sharply. "They are here." Ethan turned toward the nearest entrance, and the world shifted. The lights in his head, those impossible threads of gravity, sound, and motion flared brighter. He could feel the hunters moving through the tunnels, 3 converging from the south, 2 more sweeping wide to cut them off. They weren't guessing, they were calculating, hunting with precision. "They're surrounding us," he said. Suri gave a slow nod. "They know you now. That makes you dangerous. Dangerous to them or to us." "To both," she said quietly. A crash interrupted them, a twisted panel thrown aside, the sound ringing like a warning bell. A hunter slipped through the opening, its limbs unfolding like a predator, testing new shapes. It was different now, sleeker, more deliberate. It didn't charge, it studied, adjusting its form with faint clicks. Ethan stepped forward before he realized it, body moving on some silent command. "Stay back," he told Suri. "Ethan, I've got it." The hunter moved, fast, bladed arms cutting arcs through the air. But Ethan was already seeing the path before it took it. He twisted sideways, the blade slicing nothing but smoke, and drove his shoulder into a control panel to ricochet away before another strike. Then something shifted. It wasn't enough to dodge anymore. He felt it, a pressure, a push in his mind like an open door. The room wasn't just space anymore. It was pliable, like a fabric stretched over invisible frames. He didn't think. He moved his hands, almost like pulling a thread. The air seemed to pulse, and the hunter stumbled, its step misaligned, its weight momentarily betrayed. Suri's voice was low, but steady. "You are doing it." "Doing what?" "Changing the field." Another crash. 2 more hunters entered, flanking the first, their movements sharper, their hum like a chorus of steel. "They will not stop," Suri said. "They won't have to," Ethan muttered, shifting his stance. The air seemed to bend around him, his senses alive with movement and energy. Every cable, every hanging wire, every unstable surface was a tool waiting to be used. The first hunter lunged. Ethan didn't retreat. He stepped forward, pulling again at something he couldn't name. The floor plates shivered, a cable whipped free like a serpent. and the hunter's momentum was thrown off just enough for its blade to bite into the wall. Instead of him, sparks rained down like angry stars. The second came fast, but Ethan was faster. His body was a step ahead of his mind, every action pre-written. He spun, ducked low, and the hunter's strike carved empty air. His hand shot out, fingers brushing the cable he'd loosened on it, fell across the second hunter's path, tangling just enough to stagger it. Suri rose to her feet, her eyes wide, not with fear but something closer to awe. "You are not just surviving," she said softly. "You are teaching yourself to fight them." Ethan's chest heaved, sweat stinging his eyes, but there was something like a grin on his face. "Guess I'm a quick study." But even as he spoke, the walls shook again. More vibrations, heavier this time, deeper. The tunnels groaned like something massive was shifting above them. Suri's expression turned grim. "They send larger ones when the smaller fail." Ethan swallowed hard. Define larger. A shadow filled the far wall, blotting out the fires behind it. Something vast moved, joints clicking, limbs unfolding like a siege engine given life. The hum was a roar now, heavy enough to rattle his bones. "Time to move," Ethan said, but his voice was steady. Suri's hand brushed his arm as she stepped closer. "Ethan," she said, almost softly, "if you fall, they will take me. Do you understand?" He looked at her, really looked, and for a heartbeat the roar outside faded. Her face was calm but not cold, her violet eyes steady, trusting him in a way that made his chest tighten. "Not planning on falling," he said quietly. "Not tonight." The massive hunter stepped forward, shaking the ground. The air itself seemed to tremble as the fight came to them. The ground shook with every step of the massive hunter. Dust cascaded from the fractured ceiling like gray rain, and the hum of machinery deepened into something that sounded alive, a low, resonant growl that spoke of precision and purpose. The smaller hunters spread out along the edges of the chamber, their forms fluid, limbs shifting like knives looking for an opening. Ethan stood in the middle of it all, one arm slightly extended, body tense but balanced, Suri just behind him, her silvered form steady against the chaos. The world was too sharp now. Every hum, every flicker of light, every vibration along the steel floor rang in his head like a chord. He could feel the weight of the large hunter, the flex of its joints before it moved, the ripple of pressure in the air as the smaller ones repositioned, and beneath it all, there was something else, a pulse that wasn't his, something warm, steady. Suri's hand rested lightly on his back, and even that contact carried weight. "You can't face it head-on," Suri murmured. "It is built for war, but you are not built for nothing." Ethan gave a rough laugh. "Thanks for the pep talk." His voice was steady, but there was a thin thread of adrenaline winding through it. "So what? Run? Hide?" "No," she said softly. "Change the field." It wasn't instruction so much as trust, and somehow that trust mattered more than the threat filling the chamber. Ethan exhaled, long and deliberate, and let his mind do the impossible. He stopped looking at the hunters like enemies and started seeing them like a system. Everything had weight. Everything had motion. Everything could be shifted. The first move came from the small ones, darting forward in a coordinated strike. Their limbs cut the air with silent efficiency, but Ethan was already moving, pulling Suri behind. A collapsed transformer. A bladed arm stabbed into the wall, where his head had been a second before, sparks raining down. Ethan's hand shot out instinctively, grabbing a thick cable. Something in his brain clicked, and for an instant he felt the flow inside it, hum of dormant energy waiting. "Hold on," he said, and ripped. The cable tore free with a shriek of metal. He swung it like a whip, and though there was no power, the sheer mass was enough to knock the first hunter sideways. The second lunged, but Ethan didn't meet it. He dropped low, dragging Suri with him, and felt the air above them cleave as a blade sliced past. The large hunter moved then. Its steps were slow but deliberate, every one a thunderclap. Its limbs unfolded, revealing weapons that gleamed in the dim light cannons that glowed faintly. Things that hummed with stored energy. Ethan's mind screamed warnings. Threads of light mapping trajectories he shouldn't be able to see. They will fire, Suri said, her voice calm even now. Yeah, I kind of guessed that, Ethan muttered. He pressed his back to the cold steel, the girl at his side. For a moment, the fear threatened to creep in, but then Suri touched his arm again. The pulse he'd felt earlier deepened, a warmth cutting through the cold in his chest. You are seeing pieces, she said, but there is more. I gave you a fragment. Trust it. Trust yourself. Something in her voice quieted everything else, the fire, the hum, the fear. Ethan closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, the chamber changed. It was still steel and fire and machines, but now it was alive. The air had weight. The gravity felt like threads he could pluck. The hunters weren't just shapes. They were equations, predictable, breakable. The large hunter fired. Ethan moved. It was instinct, but more than instinct. He dropped low, pulling Suri to the floor as the cannon blast tore through the far wall, exploding in a shower of sparks and molten fragments. The shockwave slammed against his back, but he was already rolling, pushing Suri ahead of him, every step a calculation. The smaller hunters darted, but their movements were almost slow to him now. He dodged one, kicked a loose plate into another's path, and used its stumble to vault toward a support beam. The beam was weakened, cracked from the earlier fires. Ethan grabbed it with both hands and pulled not with strength alone, but with something else, something new. For a second, gravity bent, weight shifted, and the beam gave way with a groan. It crashed down between them and the large hunter, throwing up a wall of debris and sparks. Suri's eyes widened slightly. You are changing more than perception. Not sure I want to know what that means, Ethan said, dragging her toward a maintenance shaft on the side. The hunters weren't idle. Two of the smaller ones scaled the debris like spiders, their blades gleaming. The large one pushed forward, slower but unstoppable, smashing pieces aside. They had seconds. They dove into the shaft, a narrow climb space barely big enough for one, but Ethan forced it, pulling Suri with him. The metal walls vibrated with every step the hunters took behind them. It was like climbing inside a drum being beaten by war. Where does this go? He asked, breath tight. To the outside, Suri replied, but they will follow. They always do. Let them. They climbed fast, every muscle burning, until the shaft ended in a hatch. Ethan slammed his shoulder into it, again and again, until it popped open. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of ash and smoke, but also space, a reminder that above the colony was a sky too big for any prison. They pulled themselves out onto a ridge of metal high above the burning streets. From here, the destruction looked endless. Fires traced the shapes of buildings, broken transit lines glowed faintly like veins, and above it all, the last evacuation ships were just streaks of light, far out of reach. The hunters emerged behind them, their forms spilling from the hatch, climbing like nightmares, but slower now. Suri stood beside him, her silver hair moving faintly in the wind. They will not stop, not tonight, not ever. Ethan's chest rose and fell. His body ached, his brain hummed like an overloaded circuit, but he smiled a thin, defiant line. Then they'd better get used to disappointment. She looked at him, something soft and unspoken in her gaze. You saved me when you didn't have to. Now they will come for you, as they come for me. You could still leave. Ethan glanced at the horizon. There was nowhere to go, but even if there was, he knew he wouldn't take it. He looked back at her, the strange girl whose hand had changed his mind, whose touch had shifted the shape of his world. I'm not going anywhere, he said. I already made that mistake once. A pause. Then, quietly, why? Because, he said, And this time his grin was tired but real. "Someone's got to keep teaching me how to bend reality, and you seem like the best tutor around." Something flickered across her face: amusement, surprise, maybe something more. For a heartbeat, the weight of the night lifted. Behind them, the hunters began to climb. Ahead of them, the colony burned. The stars wide and silent. Ethan turned his back on the fire and started walking along the ridge, Suri beside him. The path was uncertain, but the fear was different now. It wasn't chains anymore. It was a challenge. As they moved toward the distant hills, she glanced at him once more. "This is not the end, Ethanville. This is only the first night." He smirked. "Good. I was starting to get bored." And together, carrying secrets and sparks, they vanished into the shadows of a world that no longer felt quite as broken.